Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On the night of October 11th, 1944, 20-year-old Georgette Bauerdorf left the Hollywood canteen after finishing a volunteer shift. Los Angeles was deep in the wartime years, and the canteen offered visiting service members food, music, dancing, and a few hours away from the uncertainty of what came next. For Georgette, volunteering there had become part of her routine. Nothing about that evening seemed to announce that it would be her last. Georgette returned alone to her apartment at El Palacio, an elegant Spanish-style building in West Hollywood. Its courtyards, tiled walkways, and private entrances offered residents a sense of separation from the busy streets nearby. But sometime after she came home, someone entered her apartment. By the following morning, Georgette was dead, her automobile was gone, and one small detail outside the building suggested that her killer may have prepared the way in advance. To understand why this case remains so unsettling, it helps to know who Georgette was beyond the descriptions that followed her death. Newspapers often focused on her family's wealth. Her father, George Bauerdorf, was a successful businessman in the oil industry, and Georgette had grown up with financial security, but wealth is not a personality. Friends described a young woman building an independent life, volunteering her time and making plans in a city transformed by war. She was only 20, an age when adulthood can feel both newly real and still unfinished. Georgette had moved west from New York and was living away from much of her family. Los Angeles offered freedom, social possibilities, and the energy of a city crowded with military personnel and defense workers. It also brought anonymity. People arrived and disappeared constantly, sometimes after only a few days. And that wartime movement would later complicate the search for her killer. The Hollywood canteen itself was a remarkable place. Created to entertain and support Allied service members, it depended heavily on volunteers. Famous performers appeared there, but much of the ordinary work was done by people like Georgette. They served refreshments, greeted guests, danced with servicemen, and helped keep the place running. That meant Georgette regularly met strangers, many of whom were passing through Los Angeles and might never return. Now, that does not mean someone from the canteen killed her. It simply explains the challenge investigators faced. Georgette's social world included friends, neighbors, volunteers, military personnel, and casual acquaintances. A conversation that seemed forgettable to one person might have felt important to someone else, in a city crowded by wartime travel. Even identifying everyone who had crossed her path was nearly impossible. The list of possible contacts could expand faster than detectives could check it. After completing her shift on October 11th, Georgette made her way back to El Palacio. The surviving timeline establishes that she returned home alone, but it cannot tell us exactly what happened after she arrived. Did someone follow her? Was a visitor already expected? Did she answer a knock from a person she recognized, or did someone find another way inside? Those questions sit at the center of the case, and none has ever received a definitive answer. The next morning, members of the building's housekeeping staff entered the apartment and discovered water overflowing from the bathroom. Georgette was lying face down in the bathtub. At first glance, a body in water might suggest an accidental drowning, but the scene quickly told a different story. The running water had spilled beyond the tub, leaving an apartment that was not merely quiet, but physically altered by whatever had happened during the night. An autopsy determined that Georgette had been assaulted and strangled with a piece of fabric. She had not simply slipped or lost consciousness while bathing. Someone had attacked her, killed her, and left her body in the tub with the water running. Whether the bathtub was meant to destroy evidence, delay discovery, or create the appearance of an accident remains uncertain. Whatever the intention, the medical findings made the nature of her death clear. This was murder, so let's back up a second. Before detectives could ask who had killed Georgette, they had to ask how that person reached her. Investigators found no clear evidence of forced entry. There was no obvious shattered window or violently broken door that provided a simple explanation. But an absence of forced entry does not prove that Georgette knew her attacker. A door may have been unlocked, a visitor may have been admitted under false pretenses, or access may have been gained quietly. Then there was the exterior light. Near the entrance, an automatic bulb should have illuminated the approach to the apartment. Someone had deliberately loosened it, leaving the area dark. This was not a burned-out lamp discovered by chance. The bulb had been interfered with. That detail suggests intention. Someone wanted to move near the apartment without being clearly seen, either before entering, while leaving, or both. And here's where it gets strange. Loosening the bulb required awareness. The person had to notice the light, understand that it would come on, and take action to disable it. Was that done moments before the attack? Had someone tested the entrance earlier? Did the killer know the building well enough to anticipate the lighting? The darkened courtyard cannot identify anyone, but it points away from a purely spontaneous encounter and toward at least some degree of preparation. At the same time, we should be careful not to make the clue say more than it does. Preparation does not necessarily mean a long-planned murder. A person could have disabled the light only minutes beforehand. nor does familiarity with the entrance prove the killer was a resident, a visitor, delivery worker, acquaintance. Or someone who had watched the building could have learned the same thing. The bulb narrows the emotional shape of the crime, but not the suspect list. Inside, the apartment offered another contradiction. Georgette's jewelry and substantial valuables were still there. If robbery had been the main motive, the killer had left behind items that could readily have been taken. That made the crime appear personal or sexually motivated rather than primarily financial. Still, valuables left behind do not completely rule out theft. An offender may panic, overlook items, or take only something useful for escape. In this case, that useful thing may have been Georgette's car. Her automobile was missing from El Palacio after the body was found. Investigators had to consider whether the killer had driven it away. If so, the car offered both transportation and a chance to put distance between the offender and the apartment before daylight. It also created a second crime scene, one that might preserve fingerprints, fibers, or signs of where the driver had gone. Police circulated information about the vehicle and waited for it to surface. The car was eventually found abandoned roughly 12 miles from Georgette's home. It had run out of gasoline. That fact creates a plausible picture of the killer driving until the vehicle could go no farther, then leaving on foot or finding another form of transportation. But even that is only a reconstruction. Investigators could not prove exactly who drove it, which route was taken, or whether anyone else had been inside after Georgette last used it. The location of the abandoned car extended the mystery across Los Angeles. 12 miles was far enough to move the investigation beyond Georgette's immediate neighborhood, but not far enough to reveal a clear destination. Had the driver been heading toward a home, a military installation, a bus route, or simply away from West Hollywood, running out of gasoline may have disrupted a plan, or there may have been no plan beyond escaping the apartment quickly. Police recovered fingerprints from both the apartment and the automobile. In theory, that sounds like the kind of evidence that should solve a case. But fingerprint investigation in 1944 depended on painstaking manual comparison. There was no national computerized system capable of searching millions of records in seconds. A print was useful only if it was clear enough and if investigators had a known set available for comparison. Unknown prints could remain unknown indefinitely. There was another problem. Georgette's apartment and car were not sealed environments. Friends, building employees, mechanics, and other legitimate visitors may have touched surfaces before the murder. Detectives had to separate ordinary contact from potentially criminal contact, all while working with methods far more limited than those available today. The recovered fingerprints produced no identification that could be tied conclusively to the killer. A promising category of evidence became another unresolved thread today. We naturally wonder about biological evidence and genetic genealogy. Those tools have helped solve crimes that were cold for decades. But investigators in the 1940s could not preserve and interpret a scene with future DNA testing in mind. Water had overflowed through the bathroom, multiple people entered during the discovery, and evidence standards were different. Even if original material still exists somewhere, its condition, documentation, and chain of custody would determine whether modern testing could mean anything. Detectives began tracing Georgette's recent contacts. They spoke with people who had seen her, examined her social life, and followed reports involving men she may have met through volunteer work. Every acquaintance carried a question. Was this simply someone she knew, or someone who had attached greater meaning to a brief interaction? Wartime Los Angeles made verification difficult. Servicemen could be transferred, deployed, or traveling under orders before investigators understood that they might be important. One name or description could also lead to many people. Records were scattered across military offices, employers, hotels, and local police departments. Communication between jurisdictions moved at the speed of telephone calls, telegrams, and paper files. If the killer used a false name, offered incomplete information, or left the region soon afterward, detectives might never have known which trail to follow. The case generated leads, but a lead is not evidence, and suspicion is not proof. As publicity grew, people began confessing. This happens more often in notorious cases than you might expect. Some confessors seek attention. Others are mentally unwell, confused, or trying to insert themselves into an event that has taken over the news. A credible confession must contain accurate details that were not publicly available and must fit the physical evidence. In Georgette's case, repeated confessions failed under scrutiny. None provided a reliable path to a prosecution. False confessions do more than waste time. They force detectives to recheck timelines, locate witnesses, compare fingerprints, and verify details while legitimate leads grow older. Memories change quickly, especially after newspapers publish descriptions of a crime. A witness may unknowingly blend personal recollection with something read later. By the time investigators eliminate one dramatic claim, the person who actually saw the killer near El Palacio may have forgotten a face, a voice, or a passing automobile. The physical layout of the building mattered too. Apartment living creates a peculiar kind of proximity. Neighbors may hear footsteps, water, a door closing, or voices through a wall without knowing whether anything is wrong. A person crossing a courtyard can look completely ordinary if they move with confidence. With the exterior light loosened, even an observant resident might have seen only a silhouette. Darkness did not make the killer invisible, but it reduced the chance of a useful identification. The running bathtub may also have affected what neighbors noticed. Water can mask quieter sounds, and an overflowing tub can shift attention toward a maintenance problem rather than a violent crime. Yet we do not know whether the killer considered any of that. It is tempting to turn every feature of a scene into evidence of a calculating mind. Sometimes offenders act deliberately, sometimes they improvise. The honest answer here is that the scene supports several possibilities, not one certain sequence. Investigators were left with a set of clues that seemed meaningful but refused to connect. The disabled light suggested concealment. The lack of obvious forced entry suggested quiet access. The valuables left behind weakened a simple robbery theory. The missing car suggested escape. The fingerprints promised identification but delivered none. Each fact formed part of the outline, yet the person at its center remained absent. There was no single piece of evidence strong enough to turn a theory into a charge. Over the years, Georgette's murder attracted speculation, including attempts to connect it with other violent crimes in Los Angeles. Those theories often rely on broad similarities, geography, or the idea of an unidentified repeat offender. But similarity is not the same as a forensic link. Without matching physical evidence, a reliable witness, or a documented connection between cases, such claims remain speculation. Repeating them too confidently risks replacing one unsolved crime with a more dramatic but unsupported story. What can be said with confidence is narrower. Georgette returned home after volunteering on October 11, 1944. Someone assaulted and strangled her. Her body was left face down in an overflowing bathtub. An exterior light had been deliberately disabled. Her automobile was taken and abandoned about 12 miles away after running out of gasoline. Valuable property remained in the apartment. Fingerprints were recovered, but they did not identify her killer. No confession survived verification. No one was ever charged with Georgette Bauerdorf's murder. That sentence can make the case sound frozen, as though the file simply stopped at the edge of 1944. But unresolved cases do not remain still for the people connected to them. Her family had to live with both the loss and the unanswered questions. Friends were left replaying ordinary conversations, wondering whether some remark or introduction had contained a warning no one recognized at the time. And Georgette herself deserves to be remembered as more than the young woman found in that bathroom on her final evening. She had been giving her time to others during a period defined by separation and fear. She went home expecting another ordinary night. The person who entered her life after that took more than her future. They also left behind a mystery that has often overshadowed the life she had already begun to build. The darkened courtyard remains the case's most haunting image because it captures exactly what investigators faced. There was evidence of deliberate action, but not enough light to see the person responsible. A loosened bulb, an abandoned car, unidentified fingerprints, and confessions that led nowhere all brought detectives close to an explanation without delivering one. More than 8 decades later, the central question remains unchanged. Who followed or met Georgette Bauerdorf that night, and how did they disappear without being identified? If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.